My son raised his glass at the dinner table and looked right at me. May this be Dad's last New Year's Eve in this house. Everyone laughed. I just smiled and raised my glass back. What none of them knew, I'd already made the call, and while my son was still sleeping that next morning, 3 police vehicles came quietly up my driveway. My name is Gerald Callahan. I'm 66 years old. I run a pecan farm outside San Antonio, Texas, 180 acres. I've worked for 35 years. My wife Ruth passed away 5 years ago. After she was gone, I thought about selling. Every week that thought came and went, but I never did. This place is the closest thing to her I have left. I have 2 kids. Beverly is a lawyer in Dallas. She calls every Sunday, visits every month, never once asked what I plan to do with the property. Perry is 41. After Ruth passed, his visits got shorter and his questions got different. Have you thought about what happens to the farm when you're gone, Dad? Do you know what this land is worth right now? I shut it down every time, and every time, he left a little colder. By last summer, we hadn't spoken in 4 months. Then in November, he called. I need to tell you about Ruth first because none of this story makes sense without her. We met when I was 27, married at 29, bought this property when I was 31. She was 28. We had no business buying a farm. We had almost no money and neither of us had grown up doing this kind of work. But Ruth stood at the gate the day we came to look at the place, put her hand on the fence post and said, "This is it, Gerald. This is ours." That was that. We had 30 years together on this land, planted the first pecan grove that spring with blistered hands and a borrowed tractor, raised 2 kids, Perry, and then Beverly 3 years later, built something real. Ruth handled the books, the buyers, the planning. I handled everything that required getting dirty. It worked. She passed 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 8 months, and she spent most of it still trying to manage things, still asking me whether I'd gotten the irrigation checked before summer. That was Ruth. There's a photograph of her on the shelf in the living room, taken the spring after we planted the East Grove, standing between 2 young trees that are now taller than my barn. She's squinting into the sun and laughing at something I said off camera. I walk past that photo every single morning. Some days I still say good morning to it. After she was gone, I thought hard about selling. For about a year, that thought came and went every week, but I never did it. This place is the closest thing to her I've got left. Beverly handled her mother's death the way she handles everything. She grieved, she processed it, and she came out the other side still standing. She calls me every Sunday, visits once a month minimum. Not once in 5 years has she asked me what I'm planning to do with the farm. Perry was different. The first visit after the funeral, he walked through the house like he was taking inventory. Asked me whether I'd had the land appraised recently. Asked about the estate plan. I was still numb enough that I answered the questions without really hearing them. Over the next couple of years, the pattern became clear. Every time Perry came out, the visit was fine. We'd eat, we'd talk, the grandkids would run through the grove, and then somewhere toward the end, he'd steer things around to money. Had developers contacted me? Did I know what pecan acreage was going for in Bexar County right now? Didn't I think I was working too hard for my age? Each time, I shut it down. Each time he left a little colder. Last July, he drove out alone. No Norma, no kids. We had a decent enough dinner, steaks on the grill, corn from the garden, and then we sat on the porch as the sun went down over the west fields. And I waited, because I knew something was coming. "Dad," he said, "I've been talking to a land broker out of Fort Worth. Good guy, serious operation. He's been putting together deals on agricultural parcels all through this county. The numbers he's getting are Perry." He stopped. I'm not selling. His jaw tightened. He tried again, softer this time. Said I'd worked hard enough. Said I was 66 and living alone on 18 acres. Said Ruth would have wanted me to take it easy, which was a thing he should not have said. I told him that his mother would have wanted exactly what I was doing, which was staying on the land we built together and keeping it in the family. And I told him this conversation was over. He went to bed early. I sat on that porch until full dark. The next morning, his truck was gone before I got downstairs. No note, no text, just tire tracks in the gravel. That was July, 4 months past. Not one call, not one message. I figured he needed time to cool off. I left him a voicemail in August, another in September. Both went unanswered. Beverly told me not to chase him. "He's punishing you, Dad." Let him sit with it. I didn't love that answer, but I didn't have a better one. Then in November, he called. His voice was warm. That's the first thing I noticed. Not the careful, tight warmth of someone being polite. Genuinely warm, like the Perry who used to call me after a rough week just to check in. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking, said the July conversation was his fault, that he'd pushed too hard and had no right to. He asked if he could bring Norma and the kids out for New Year's fresh start. Whole family together. I said, yes, I want to be honest about that. Part of me heard that voice and wanted to believe every word. Perry at his best was a good man. He coached Roy's baseball team. He remembered birthdays. When Ruth was sick, he drove out twice a month without being asked. I wanted that Perry back, badly enough that I pushed down the part of me that knew something was still off. I should have listened to that part. Here's what I hadn't told anyone yet. Not Beverly, not my old army buddy Marvin Holt. Nobody. 3 things had gone wrong on this property in the weeks before Perry's call, and I'd been explaining each one away. First was the tractor. I'd parked it on the slope beside the East Grove the way I've done 100 times over 35 years. Next morning I climbed in, reached for the handbrake, and it moved like it was connected to nothing. I got out and checked the cable underneath. It had been partially cut, not frayed, not worn. Cut. Clean. If I'd been coming downhill and needed to stop, I'd have gone straight through the fence at the bottom. Maybe worse. I told myself it was vandalism. Kids from the county road, maybe. Second was the basement stairs. My farmhouse has a steep wooden staircase going down to the utility room. I was carrying a box of canning jars when my boot hit the 3rd step and it dropped hard, not broke, just gave way under my weight. I grabbed the wall, lost the jars, stood there shaking for a minute. When I checked, the mounting screws on both sides of that step had been backed out halfway. Enough to hold if you stepped light. Not enough to hold a full-grown man carrying weight. I told myself I'd forgotten to tighten them after some repair I couldn't remember doing. Third was the fence post by the well at the north end of the property. I leaned against it one morning and the whole section tilted. 2 boards had been sawed most of the way through on the underside, still looked solid from the top, but one good push would have taken the whole thing down. That well opening is 4 feet across. No cover on it since the pump replacement in September. I didn't tell myself anything about that one. I just fixed it and tried not to think about the drop. 3 incidents, 3 weeks. I kept filing them away separately, the way you do when you don't want to see what they add up to. Then my medication stopped working. I've taken metoprolol for my heart for 6 years. I picked up my monthly refill in early December. 4 days into the new bottle, I felt wrong. Dizzy when I stood up too fast, vision going soft at the edges, heart rate slower than it should be. Not dangerously slow, just wrong, like a clock losing time. I figured I was fighting a cold. By December 10th, I was gripping the kitchen counter to cross the room. Beverly drove down that weekend. She took one look at me and sat me down at the table and didn't move until I told her everything. All of it, the tractor, the stairs, the fence, the pills, in order. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill she learned from Ruth. When I finished, she picked up my pill bottle and turned it over in her hands. "We're going to the pharmacist tomorrow," she said. "First thing, Howard Mills has run the pharmacy in Castroville for 25 years. He's filled my prescriptions the whole time I've been on this land." He took the bottle, shook one pill into his palm, and held it under his desk lamp. Then he scraped it lightly with his thumbnail. A fine white powder came off the coating. He looked up at me. "Metoprolol doesn't do that," he said. "The coating is polymer-based. This is chalk." He picked up a magnifying glass, and this imprint, it's pressed, not stamped. "Someone made these by hand, Gerald. These are not your medication." He sealed the bottle in a plastic evidence bag while he was still talking. "You need to stop taking these immediately, and you need to call the police today. Not tomorrow, today." Beverly already had her phone out. I sat in that pharmacy chair and looked at the sealed bag sitting on Howard's counter. My pills with my name on the label that were not my pills. I thought about the tractor brake, the basement stairs, the fence by the well, and I thought about Perry's warm voice on the phone in November. "Fresh start, Dad. I've missed you." I didn't say anything out loud, but I stopped telling myself these things were accidents. Beverly made 2 calls that afternoon. The first was to a Texas Ranger named Shirley Dawson, who worked elder exploitation out of the San Antonio field office. The second call, the one I asked her to make, was to Marvin Holt. Marvin and I served together in the Gulf, 1st Infantry Division 90 to 91. He's been my closest friend for 30 years and lives 40 minutes from the farm. When things get serious, Marvin is who I call. Beverly reached him on the first try. He asked one question: "What does Gerald need?" She told him. He said he'd be there by 8. He was there by 7:45. Shirley Dawson drove out to the farm 2 days later. No uniform, no patrol car. Just a quiet woman in her mid-40s in jeans and boots with a badge clipped to her belt and a yellow legal pad under her arm. She shook my hand, accepted a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table like she had all the time in the world. I walked her through everything. The tractor in July, the basement stairs, the fence by the well, the pills. I laid it out in order, same as I'd done for Beverly. She didn't write much. Mostly she listened. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me straight. Mr. Callahan, 3 of those 4 incidents required someone who knew this property well, knew where the tractor was parked, knew which stairs you use every day, knew where your well was and that the cover was off. She paused. And the 4th required someone who knew your pharmacy, your medication, and your pickup schedule. I didn't say anything. When did your son visit last? July? The night before our argument. She nodded slowly and wrote something down. Marvin sat across the table from her the whole time. He didn't say much. That's not his style, but having him there mattered. Some things are easier to say when you've got someone in your corner who's known you for 30 years. The lab results came back December 26th. Shirley drove out and sat across from me with the report in a manila folder. Beverly was beside me. Marvin had stepped outside to give us room, but I could see him through the kitchen window, leaning on the fence post, waiting. The pills contained digoxin. Shirley explained it plainly. Digoxin is a cardiac drug used in controlled doses for certain heart conditions. In the amounts packed into those capsules, combined with my actual heart history, consistent use over 10 to 14 days would have pushed my potassium levels into dangerous territory. My heart would have started misfiring, most likely outcome, cardiac arrest during sleep, no trauma, no marks. A 66-year-old man with a documented heart condition found in his bed on a rural property. No medical examiner looks twice at that without a specific reason to. Beverly put both hands flat on the table and stared at the wall for a long moment. I looked at the report. I looked at my hands. I thought about those 4 mornings I'd taken those pills with breakfast, how I'd felt wrong and told myself it was a cold. I'd taken them for 4 days before Beverly came down. 4 days. Who made these? I asked. Shirley opened a second folder. That's what I need to show you next. Her warrant for Perry's financial records had come back. He'd filed Chapter 11 in April, $420,000 in total debt, $220,000 owed to an illegal gambling operation in Fort Worth, another $200,000 in private loans, the kind that don't come with patience. Then there was Gloria Voss. Shirley laid a DMV photo on the table, a woman, 36, dark-haired, sharp-looking, based in Houston. She called herself a real estate investment consultant. Her license had been revoked in 2022 for fraud. 2 prior federal convictions, wire fraud, check manipulation, currently under investigation in 2 other states. Phone records showed 180-plus messages between Perry and Gloria, going back 5 months, starting around the time Perry had stopped returning my calls. Shirley spread out a handful of printed transcripts, highlighted in yellow. One from Gloria to Perry, sent November 9th, the day before he called me with that warm apology voice. He needs to trust you. Be patient. This only works if he invites you in. One from Perry to Gloria, December 13th, 9 days after I'd picked up the tampered prescription. He took them. Feeling it by now, I think. I read that one twice. She found him at a real estate event in Fort Worth back in June, Shirley said. She targets men in financial trouble, gets them dependent on her, then points them in a direction that benefits her. She was going to help Perry move the land once it transferred. And Perry, Beverly started, made his own choices, Shirley said. He's 41 years old. She opened a door. He walked through it. Nobody said anything for a while after that. Shirley's plan was simple. Don't cancel New Year's. Don't change anything. Let Perry come. She had 4 hidden cameras installed the following week. Barn entrance, kitchen, basement stairwell, and one covering the front driveway. A surveillance unit would sit a quarter-mile down the county road. Beverly would stay at the farm. Marvin would be 10 minutes away by phone. Can you do this? Shirley asked me. Sit across from him for 2 days and act like nothing has changed? I thought about Ruth's photo on the shelf in the living room. I thought about Roy asking me how long it takes a pecan tree to produce fruit. I thought about Faye holding my hand on the walk from the car to the porch. I can do it, I said. Perry arrived December 30th with Norma and both kids. He stepped out of the truck looking tired around the eyes but smiling, that same careful warmth he'd been wearing since November. He hugged me on the porch and said it was good to be home. I hugged him back. Those 2 days were the hardest thing I've done since the Gulf. At least over there you knew which side of the wire you were on. At dinner the first night, Perry said he'd noticed the basement stairs looked uneven. Offered to check them in the morning. I told him that would be a big help. The camera got all 11 minutes of it. New Year's Eve, I cooked a full dinner: brisket, roasted corn, baked beans, the kind of meal Ruth used to make when the whole family came out. I set the table the same way she did, with the good plates we only used for holidays. Roy helped me carry dishes from the kitchen without being asked. Faye sat on the counter and talked the entire time I was cooking, the way 6-year-olds do about her teacher and her best friend, and a dog she wanted but Norma kept saying no to. Normal. All of it completely normal, except that 4 cameras were running and a surveillance van was parked down the road in the dark. Norma moved through the evening quietly. She'd been quiet the whole visit, not unfriendly, just carrying something. I didn't know then what she knew or didn't know. I found out later she knew nothing. She thought the financial trouble was temporary. She thought this visit was exactly what Perry said it was. After dinner, Perry poured champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the kids. We watched the countdown on the TV. Roy and Faye were wound up about the fireworks going off across the valley. You can see 3 or 4 neighbors shows from my back porch on a clear night. At midnight, Perry stood up. He looked around the table at Norma, at Roy, at Faye, and then he looked at me. He held my eyes with an expression I'd been reading wrong for 2 months. I'd been calling it warmth. Standing there at the end of those 2 days, watching him hold that glass, I finally saw it for what it was. It was relief. Preemptive relief. The look of a man who believes something difficult was almost finished. To this place, he said, and to new beginnings, he paused just a beat. May this be Dad's last New Year's Eve in this house. Norma smiled. Roy banged his cup on the table. Faye clapped. I raised my glass. To new beginnings, I said. We drank. Perry sat down and put his arm around Roy and pointed out the window at a burst of color going up from the Henderson place a mile east. And I watched my son watch the fireworks with his children, and I felt something I still don't have a clean word for, not hate, not grief exactly. Something heavier than both. I said I was tired and went upstairs at 12:20. I locked my bedroom door. I'd been doing that since Shirley came out. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. The house settled around me the way old houses do in the cold creaks and pops and the low whistle of wind finding the gaps around the window frames. Ruth used to say this house breathes. I'd never thought much about that until the past 2 weeks, lying in the dark, listening to every sound. Around 1:30, I heard footsteps in the hall, slow ones, not the half-asleep shuffle of someone heading to the bathroom. Deliberate, they stopped outside my door. I didn't move. I watched the gap at the bottom, a thin line of light from the hallway nightlight. A shadow broke it. Someone standing right there on the other side. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 2 minutes. Long enough that I had time to think very clearly about everything that had led to this moment. The farm, the 30 years, Ruth's hands in the soil planting the first trees. Perry at 9 years old riding on the tractor with me, all of it moving through my head while I watched that shadow under the door. Then the footsteps moved away. A door closed down the hall. I didn't sleep after that, I just waited for morning. At 60:52, I heard tires on the gravel. I was already dressed and standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee when Shirley's unmarked car came up the driveway, followed by 2 Bexar County Sheriff's units. Quiet, no lights. Beverly came downstairs a minute later and stood beside me without saying a word. Shirley knocked, I opened the door and stepped aside. They went up the stairs. I heard the knock on the guest room door. Heard Perry's muffled voice. Confused. Heard the door open. Then I heard him say my name. I was in the hallway by then. Perry stood in the doorway in a white t-shirt, hair still flat from sleep, looking past the deputy at me. His face moved through several things, fast confusion, then understanding, then something that collapsed all at once. Dad. His voice came out low. Dad, please. You know why they're here, Perry, I said. There wasn't anything else to say. Norma appeared at the end of the hall in her robe, saw the deputies, and started crying before anyone explained anything. Beverly got to Roy and Faye before they made it out of their room. She took them downstairs for breakfast and kept them there. They walked Perry out in handcuffs. He stumbled on the porch step and a deputy caught his arm. I watched from inside through the front window. He didn't look back at the house. They put him in the rear of the unit and the door shut, and that was that. Gloria Voss was picked up in Houston at the same time. I stood at that window after the vehicles turned out of the driveway, and I kept standing there after the dust settled and the road went quiet again. Beverly came and put her hand on my shoulder. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then I walked to the living room and stood in front of Ruth's photograph on the shelf. That picture of her between the 2 young pecan trees, squinting into the sun, laughing. I held it together, I told her. Like you would have? Perry was sentenced to 15 years. Gloria Voss got 12. Texas doesn't treat elder abuse with premeditation lightly, and the physical evidence was comprehensive. The tractor cable, the stairs, the well fence, the digoxin, the camera footage, 180-plus text messages laying out every step of the plan. Norma took Roy and Faye to her sister's place in Memphis. She filed for divorce and was granted full custody without a fight. She sends me a short message every few weeks. The kids call on Sunday afternoons. Roy asked me once if his dad was a bad person. I told him his dad made terrible choices when he was desperate and scared, and that being a bad person and making bad choices were two different things, even when it was hard to see the difference. He thought about that for a while, and then asked if we could plant another row of pecan trees in the spring. I said yes. I rewrote the will. Beverly gets 60% with the condition she keeps the farm operating for at least 10 years. Roy and Faye each get 20% held in trust until they turn 25. Ruth would have done it the same way. Marvin comes by most Saturdays. We drink coffee on the porch and watch the East Grove in the morning light and don't talk about it much. Some things don't need much talking. Here's what I'd tell anyone in a similar situation. When something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Not every instinct is paranoia. 3 things going wrong on a well-maintained property in the same month is not coincidence. Write down the dates and what happened. That notebook ended up in Shirley's evidence file. Get help early. That's the one I almost didn't do. I nearly talked myself out of calling Beverly. I kept thinking I could sort it out on my own, or that I was imagining things. I wasn't. Love your family and protect yourself. Those 2 things are not in conflict. I loved Perry. I still do, in whatever way a father loves a son who tried to kill him, but love doesn't mean making yourself easy to hurt, and forgiveness is your own business. So is your safety. Figure out where one ends and the other begins before someone else figures it out for you. I survived a war. I spent 35 years building something on this land alongside the best person I've ever known. The pecan trees Ruth and I planted are 35 years old now, taller than the barn, still producing every fall like clockwork. I wasn't going to disappear quietly, and in the spring Roy and I are going to plant a new row. The land doesn't know what happened here. It just keeps growing, and so do I. Some men lose everything trying to take what was never theirs. I just made sure this place would outlive that mistake. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. I'd like to know where you're watching from.